Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Natalie Gupton, and we will be talking about emergency action plans and just a touch on first aid. So basic considerations to be prepared for an emergency. And just for a perspective, this is from federal consideration and not state specific. I'm the Vice President and Chief Operating Officer for AgSafe. We are headquartered in Modesto, California, and I am in Louisville, Kentucky. Follow us on social media, some great updates there, some tips and tricks, and of course, our upcoming trainings at AgSafe Online. Of course, you can also find everything that's coming up and additional resources on our website at agsafe.org. Just a quick disclaimer, give you a moment to read that, and then we will dive into today's content. Okay, so we're going to cram a lot in the next 30 minutes together. So first of all, we're going to go over emergency action plans, what they are and what they should include, as well as the requirements under federal OSHA, review of pre-emergency planning, a little bit on first aid, and just a little on CPR. So there's two categories of emergencies and things to consider when making your emergency action plans. There's natural and man-made. And of course, depending on where you're located in the country, some of the natural may be relevant to you and some of it may not. Being in Kentucky, hurricanes and earthquakes aren't something that we have to really think about on a regular basis. We do have earthquakes on occasion, so maybe something to have checked in the back of our heads, but not a usual natural disaster that we encounter. And just like you folks in California, you don't have to worry about tornadoes. So, taking that into consideration as you plan and what your region is susceptible to. Now, man-made, again, some may be more applicable to you and your farming operation, could be your region, and then again, what you have available there on your farming operation. So again, different things to consider as you plan for different types of emergency, natural and man-made. Okay, so diving in, emergency action plan. So here's just a basic plan. This is, you just need something. May not be under the microscope of federal OSHA. You may be a small family farm and not a lot of employees, or it's just you and your family members. It's good to have a plan. Any plan is better than no plan. And so in a basic plan, some things that you should consider having are emergency numbers for local fire, police, and sheriff, business numbers for your electric, gas, and phone companies, clear directions to and from your farm, your facility information. So, do you have grain bins? Do you have, a hatchery, your poultry operation? Those types of things. You have those types of information ready and available for your first responders, depending on what type of instances occur. Site information, including any chemicals you may have on site, such as your pesticides, a map of your farm, and then emergency response procedures, who's making phone calls, where are employees meeting, safe exit routes, and practice your plan. So going back to that bullet point ahead, emergency response procedures. Now, if it's just you, your brother-in-law, and your dad, again, somebody needs to take responsibility and know who's doing what in an emergency situation. Again, if it's a health emergency and that person that is supposed to, shut down the electricity and they're incapacitated, again, somebody's going to have to take that over. So just having a plan and having a backup plan, planning for the unexpected, if that's even possible, right? So again, talking about those phone numbers, having them ready and available, if it's not 911, you do call 911, but you also need your business numbers as electric, gas, and phone companies. If you have an explosion on your facility, being able to call the gas company and get that shut off and inform them of what's going on. Again, it's good to have those handy as, depending on the type of emergency, you could be without cell service. So again, having these ready and available and posted in conspicuous locations throughout your facilities will be very handy. Okay, clear directions to and from your farm from the nearest major road or highway. And depending on where you are, especially if you're in a very rural area, this is very important. We can't always just rely on Google Maps and GPS to take someone directly to your farm in different areas and facilities on your operation. You could be a major farming operation and have huge coverage, a lot of acreage, and you may have one address, but if an emergency occurs in your back barn or a different building that is much further away from your physical address, it's going to be hard for the first responders to really know where to go. So have clear directions that you can even practice saying and reciting when you make that call to 911 or those first responders. And take note of landmarks and distances. And then also plan with your first responders. If they have time, you have time, this is a great opportunity to work with them that you can explain your farming operation, show where grain bins are, show where the lagoon is, different things that a first responder should know and where accidents are prone to happen. And that they are more familiar with your facilities and with your operation, the more, the quicker that they can respond when you call when you're in time of need. And then have a map of your farm is available as well. And so that's something that you can provide and help pre-plan with those first responders. Again, if they don't have time to come out and check out your facilities, providing one to them and just stopping in at their offices and just go through a brief overview of your farming facility. I'm sure they would appreciate that. So that's just some basic things that to consider when making a basic emergency action plan. However, from a federal perspective, it is a requirement by Fed OSHA to have an emergency action plan. And there are some required elements that you need to make sure that you include in this plan. And so 29 CFR 1910-38, if you want to take time and read through the full standard. But within that, what you see on the screen is what is required by OSHA in the standard. So first, you need to have emergency escape routes and procedures for evacuation. You need to have an alarm system. So how are you going to alert your employees that an emergency is occurring and you need to enact your emergency action plan? A means to account for all employees after evacuation. Procedures for employees who remain to operate equipment shut down prior to evacuation. So that one is very important, depending on your type of operation. You know, if you're at poultry or dairy, you've got all kinds of equipment that is running, and depending on, again, the emergency, will you need to shut down those facilities properly in order to safely evacuate? And, you know, depending on the type of emergency, you don't want your employees to panic. And having those clear responsibilities outlined prior to those emergencies are essential. Rescue and medical duties and training for those employees who are to perform them. So depending on what state you're in, some states require a certain number of employees to be trained on first aid and CPR per, you know, for example, 20 employees, there should be one individual present and certified to be able to perform that. So again, whether it's required or not, it's a good practice. And so making sure somebody is trained and knows how to perform those duties if necessary. Preferred means of reporting fires and other emergencies, and names or job titles of persons or departments who can be contacted for information or explanation of the plan. So who's in charge, who's training, who's enforcing, who's updating your emergency action plan. And so having that outline is a requirement. And then, of course, training when the plan is developed on an initial assignment and when the plan changes. So just like most OSHA standards, again, when a person is hired, you need to provide training. And that training should be a great overview, an in-depth explanation of your emergency action plan and all the procedures that accompany it. And then if there's any changes. And so you should update your plan. I mean, I would say give it a review annually. You should be practicing it at least annually. But, you know, over time, you need to make sure that things are still relevant. You know, you didn't make any updates in your farming operation. People have changed. So you need to ensure that it stays up to date and that everyone knows of the changes when they do occur. So on the screen, this is an example of making a map of your farm. There are several resources online. I encourage you to check those out. If you do not have a map of your operation, you can use Google Earth. You can access resources from your farm service agency, and they have maps available. And so having this is a good best practice, and be able to share it to those that it would be relevant to, like your first responders. So diving a little bit more into those requirements, you know, general emergency procedures, that alarm. How are employees going to know when an emergency situation is occurring? You know, is it verbal, radio, cell phone, or in person? And then buildings can be equipped with various alarms. So again, depending on where you are, the type of emergency, you know, is it a wildfire? Is it just a regular fire? Was it a chemical explosion? Your cell phone may or may not work properly, and you can't always just rely on that cell phone. And so having an alternative to the cell phone as an alarm to alert employees of an emergency. Emergency gathering locations. So identify an area or areas where your employees or your family members can gather in case of an emergency. Because again, your communication may be breaking down because the infrastructure is on. You know, your radio may not work, your cell phone may not work. And so if you cannot get in touch with one another, you need to meet in a specific location. They know, I cannot talk to so-and-so, I need to meet in this place. And you have evacuation procedures. You know, offices, barns, shops, labor houses, fields. Again, you got to think of all the different locations you could have people located. and how they need to be able to reach that gathering location. Again, this is another resource. It's a template. Most things have already been done for you out there. Take time, do some planning, some research, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Lots of templates out there. Michigan State has a great resource. I think North Carolina University or North Carolina State has another great template out there. So I encourage you to check those out and fill the pieces in and make it relevant for your farm. Again, don't have to work harder, just work smarter, and take advantage of the resources that are available out there. So planning and preparation. So, 1, 2, and 3, pre-plan, first responders, train, and practice. So kudos to you if you already have an emergency action plan, but are you practicing it? It's important that your employees and your family members know what to do in an emergency. They can't take precious minutes to go back in the recess of their brain and go back to the first time that they were hired and you all went over your emergency action plan. You need to go over it at least once a year and train and practice on that plan. They need to go on their instinct, and it should just come as second nature when an emergency occurs. They know exactly what to do and not have to think through on what they were trained on 3 years ago. Okay, first aid. So all a part of emergency planning is knowing and being prepared for just common first aid issues. Something simple that you can address quickly without having a first responder help you, like just a simple cut or a burn. Some other common things that happen on the farm, get animal or insect bites or stings, sprains and strains, dehydration and heat exhaustion, frostbite and hypothermia, depending on, again, where you are in the country, and broken bones. So again, those last 3 are a little bit more serious, but knowing what to do immediately for first aid can help the extensiveness of decrease the seriousness of the situation and help that first responder when they arrive to provide that assistance and care for that individual. So knowing signs and symptoms of distress are important, and helping your employees identify this with either A, themselves, or B, other employees. Cramps, nausea, bleeding, dizziness, slurred speech, and notable pain and or discomfort, disorientation, and unusual behavior. So talking about the cramps, nausea, and swelling, dizziness, encouraging employees to speak up if this is occurring to them, because sometimes these are not visible to another person. You may not notice that the individual working next to you is cramping, or they may feel nauseated unless they actually verbally tell you. So encourage employees to speak up if they are experiencing any of these symptoms, so that you can provide the right care and aid to them to prevent it from escalating into something more serious. It's always important to have a well-stocked first aid kit. And on the screen, you'll see some recommendations of the best things to have in that first aid kit. And those that have registered for the webinar, I'll be sure to send out a list to you so that you have this available. Down at the bottom, you see over-the-counter medicine, family only. So depending on how big your operation is, if you're a small family farm, if you only have a couple employees, just be cautious when providing any type of medication to a non-family member. Use your best judgment there. Yeah, and this is just a nice little shot of things that should be included in a first aid kit. Now, you see a Sharpie in a Ziploc bag. Why in the world do you need a Sharpie in a first aid kit? Again, depending on where you are in the country, insect bites could be something that you need to worry about. I know in Kentucky, we have lots of issues with ticks, and they've really seemed to increase over the past few years. And so it's good to have the Sharpie in a Ziploc bag and tweezers. If you do get a tick bite, it's recommended that when you remove that tick, to keep it, put it in the Ziploc bag, and to use that Sharpie to circle where that bite occurred, because you can monitor that area to make sure it's not getting worse, progressing, swelling, getting any larger, or anything abnormal. And really that could go for any type of bite. That Sharpie will help you recognize where exactly that bite happened, and you can monitor it and ensure you do not need further care. So keep those first aid kits in all the right places. Having one kit back at the barn doesn't help you when you're in the field and somebody gets a significant cut and they're bleeding, and all you really need is just to simply clean the wound and wrap it up and provide a bandage. It's going to take you a moment, get in the truck, drive them to the barn, locate the kit. Just have multiple kits available, whether you have office shop, great places to have it in your vehicles, tractor cab. Just have them available as many places as possible, because when a first aid situation occurs, you want to have that kit readily available. And when responding to a first aid situation, remain calm. Always wear gloves when providing care. And when in doubt, always call 911. Again, going back to that emergency action plan, have logical driving directions prepared so you can explain where you're located. And potentially, again, depending on where you're located, meet emergency services as close as practical. So if you have more than one person with you, you can instruct them while you stay with the victim and have them meet the first responder. And always stay as calm as possible. Again, just some best practices here. First, you got to make the decision to help when you recognize there's an emergency. And, first aid 101, just ensure that it's safe for you to provide assistance. And, identify any additional hazards. You make sure that you're safe, providing those gloves, and that, you cannot put yourself in danger, because then we have two victims now. If you try to provide assistance and it's not safe for you to do so. And then, of course, providing additional help by calling 911 and providing basic first aid care until that additional help arrives. Okay, just to touch on CPR, just really want to emphasize the importance of knowing how to administer CPR. And according to the American Red Cross, 85% of cardiac emergencies occur at home or at work. And so a delay in treatment of 4 to 5 minutes can decrease survival rates by as much as 40%, while delays of 10 minutes or longer can result in death 95% of the time. So you can see the importance of why you need to know CPR and how life-saving it can be, and when administered in a timely fashion. Become certified if that's an option for you. There's lots of available resources and training out there. You can even get trained online. Of course, I recommend getting training in person so you can have that hands-on experience. but there are some training courses online, some at low cost and some can't even be free. Again, this is just a few options there for you on those who provide that first aid CPR certifications. Of course, AgSafe is a provider, American Red Cross, National CPR Foundation, and depending on what community you live in, maybe some of your local agencies will provide those trainings as well. So some resources out there, and OSHA does have a lot of great fact sheets that provide an overview and give a great snapshot of information, even emergency for farm workers. So a great resource out there. Again, and take advantage of those emergency planning templates from different entities out there. A lot of universities do provide those too. So with that, that concludes today's presentation. I appreciate your time. I will stay online just in case anyone has any questions. We'll be providing a copy of the slides and a couple resources for you to those that registered for the webinar today. Remember, this is a free webinar series that we provide every month, the second Tuesday of each month, 8:30 Pacific, 11:30 Eastern Standard Time. So thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful day.